The blood on her torn sleeve wasn't hers, but Beatrice Owens knew the four men tracking her through the Colorado wilderness wouldn't care about that detail when they caught up. She stumbled over another route in the dim morning light, her lungs burning as she pushed deeper into the pine forest that stretched endlessly before her. The contract tucked inside her bodice felt like it weighed more than iron shackles. Though it was just paper and ink that declared her bound to work off a debt she'd never actually incurred. It was 1876, and the mining towns of Colorado had become a haven for men who saw women as commodities to be bought and sold under the guise of legal contracts. Beatrice had made the mistake of accepting a loan from a man named Vincent Harrow to bury her father 3 months ago in Denver. She'd thought it was charity from a family friend. Instead, he'd produced papers claiming she owed him $2,000 and had sold her contract to a brothel owner in Central City. When she'd refused to go willingly, they'd come for her in the night. She'd fought. One of them had a broken nose to show for it. Another had taken her knife to his shoulder before she'd managed to escape through a window. But fighting had only bought her hours, not freedom. They were coming, and they wouldn't be gentle when they found her. The forest opened suddenly into a small clearing where a creek burbled over smooth stones. Beatrice didn't hesitate, splashing through the cold water to mask her scent and tracks. Her shoes were falling apart, her dress torn and muddy, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Exhaustion pulled at her limbs, but terror was a powerful motivator. She'd heard stories about what happened to girls who ended up in those places, how the law turned a blind eye because the contracts were technically legal, how once you were in, you rarely got out. A gunshot cracked through the morning air. Beatrice's heart lurched into her throat. They were closer than she'd thought. She abandoned any attempt at stealth and ran, her wet skirts slapping against her legs. The forest grew denser here, the pines so thick they blocked out most of the early light. She had no idea where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. Another clearing appeared, but this one wasn't natural. A cabin stood in the center, solid and well built from thick logs with a stone chimney from which thin smoke curled. A lean-to shelter held stacked firewood and what looked like animal pelts stretched on frames. Someone lived here, far from any town or settlement. Beatrice had maybe 30 seconds to decide. She could keep running into unknown wilderness with no food, no proper shoes, and 4 armed men on her trail. Or she could take her chances with whoever lived in that cabin. The decision made itself when she heard voices shouting behind her, close enough that she could make out words. She ran to the cabin door and pounded on it with both fists. "Please, please, someone help me." No answer. The door was latched but not locked. She glanced over her shoulder and saw movement through the trees. Her pursuers would be in the clearing within moments. Beatrice pushed the door open and stumbled inside, then turned to close it behind her. The interior was dim but clean, surprisingly so for a wilderness cabin. A large bed frame with a thick mattress and furs dominated one corner. A stone fireplace held glowing coals. Shelves lined one wall with supplies, tools, and what looked like books. A table and 2 chairs sat near the center, and animal pelts covered parts of the floor. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing in my cabin?" Beatrice spun around, her hand flying to her chest. A man stood in the doorway to what must have been a back room, and he was the largest human being she'd ever seen. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly filled the doorframe. His arms, bare beneath rolled-up shirt sleeves, were corded with muscle. His chest was deep and powerful, his hands large enough to span her waist. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back carelessly with a leather cord, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. His eyes, a striking gray-blue, fixed on her with an intensity that made her take a step back. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude, but there are men chasing me and I need help, please. They're going to be here any second and they have guns and I can't run anymore." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. The man's expression didn't change. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed a rifle from above the door, then moved to the window. "How many?" "4. "Why are they chasing you?" "They bought my contract. They want to force me to work in a brothel in Central City." I ran. His jaw tightened. He glanced at her, taking in her torn dress, her muddy, bleeding feet, the desperation in her eyes. Then he looked back out the window. "Get against that far wall and stay quiet." Beatrice didn't argue. She pressed herself into the corner farthest from the door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Heavy footsteps approached the cabin. A fist pounded on the door. The mountain man opened it, his large frame filling the entrance completely. "What?" "We're tracking a girl. Red hair about this tall, wearing a blue dress. You seen her?" The voice was rough, impatient. "I've seen exactly nobody. I live alone out here for a reason. Now get off my property." "Now hold on, friend. We got legal papers saying she's ours. She's a runaway, and we got the right to retrieve her. Won't take but a minute to search your cabin, just to be sure." "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying that girl's worth $2,000 to us, and we ain't leaving without checking." From her corner, Beatrice could see part of the scene through the open door. 4 men stood in the clearing, all armed. She recognized them. Wade Cassidy, the brothel owner's enforcer, a mean-faced man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his cheek. The other 3 were hired guns, men who'd do anything for money. The mountain man didn't move. "You got a warrant from a federal marshal. This is federal land. Your local papers don't mean anything out here." Wade's hand moved toward his gun. "We don't need no warrant for a runaway." "Now step aside or we'll move you aside." The mountain man's voice dropped to something low and dangerous. "You can try." The tension stretched so tight Beatrice thought it would snap. She saw Wade's companions shift nervously. Up close, the mountain man was clearly not someone to trifle with. He held the rifle casually, but there was nothing casual about his stance or his eyes. "There's 4 of us," Wade said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "I only count 4 targets. Won't take but 4 bullets." The mountain man tilted his head slightly. "Or we can make this simple. You leave now, and I don't have to bury 4 bodies on my property. It's a lot of work, and I've got other things to do today." One of the hired guns took a step back. "Wade, maybe she went another direction. We could have lost her trail at the creek. She came this way, I know she did." "And I'm telling you she's not here," the mountain man said. "You've got 10 seconds to start walking back the way you came. After that, I start shooting." For a long moment, nobody moved. Beatrice held her breath, certain this would end in gunfire and blood. She'd brought this violence to this stranger's door, and now he might die because of it. But Wade finally stepped back, his hand moving away from his gun. "You're making a mistake, friend. When we find her, and we will, you'll answer for this. I'm not your friend, and you're down to 5 seconds." The 4 men retreated, but Wade called back. "We'll be watching the trails. She can't hide in these mountains forever." The mountain man stood in the doorway until the men disappeared into the trees. Then he waited several more minutes before finally closing the door and setting the heavy wooden bar across it. He placed the rifle back above the door and turned to face Beatrice. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I thought they'd kill me." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You got a name, Beatrice. Beatrice Owens." "I'm Dalton Zimmerman. You look half dead. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning." He moved to the shelves and began pulling down items. "Sit down before you fall down." Beatrice's legs gave out, and she sank into one of the chairs at the table. Now that the immediate danger had passed, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She watched as Dalton built up the fire and set a pot of water to heat, moving with economical grace despite his size. He cut thick slices from a loaf of bread and laid out dried meat, cheese, and some kind of preserved fruit. "Eat slowly," he said, setting the food in front of her. "Your stomach will rebel if you rush." She wanted to devour everything on the plate, but she forced herself to take small bites. The bread was hearty and fresh. The meat was venison, perfectly seasoned. The cheese was sharp and creamy. It was the best meal she'd ever tasted, probably because she was starving, but she didn't care. Dalton made coffee, strong and dark, and poured her a cup. Then he sat down across from her and waited while she ate. His presence was overwhelming in the small space, but not threatening. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel, for the first time in 3 months, like maybe she could breathe. When she'd finished half the food and couldn't eat another bite, she wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and met his eyes. "Why did you help me?" "Because you needed help. You don't even know me. For all you know, I could be a thief or a murderer. Those men said they had legal papers." His expression darkened. "I know the kind of papers they're talking about. Contract slavery dressed up in legal language. It's evil, plain, and simple. No woman deserves that." Tears welled up in Beatrice's eyes before she could stop them. She'd been holding everything together through sheer willpower, but his words cracked something open inside her. "I didn't know. My father died, and a man I thought was his friend offered to pay for the funeral. He said it was charity, that I could pay him back when I was able. Then he showed up with these papers saying I'd agreed to work off the debt, and he'd sold the contract to that man, Wade. I tried to fight it legally, but the judge wouldn't listen. He said a contract is a contract. Let me see it." Beatrice hesitated, then reached into her bodice and pulled out the folded papers. They were damp with sweat and creek water, but still legible. She handed them to Dalton. He read through them carefully, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he stood up, walked to the fireplace, and threw the papers into the flames. Beatrice gasped. "What are you doing? That's the only copy." "No, it's not. They'll have others, but they won't have yours." He watched the paper catch fire and curl into ash. "And now you can say honestly that you don't have it, which means they have no physical proof that you signed anything. But they'll still come after me. Wade said I'm worth $2,000 to them. Then we make sure they don't find you." Dalton returned to the table and sat down. "Those men will watch the trails for a few days, but they can't stay out here forever. They'll need to resupply, and they won't want to spend too much time searching when there's no guarantee you're even still alive. The wilderness kills people who aren't prepared for it. So what do I do? Hide here forever. You stay here until it's safe to move. Then we figure out your next step." Beatrice shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. If they find out you helped me, they could charge you with interference or harboring a fugitive or something." "Let them try." His voice was flat, final. "This is my land, bought and paid for. I choose who stays on it. Besides, I could use the company. Gets quiet out here." She didn't believe that last part. Dalton Zimmerman struck her as a man who'd chosen solitude deliberately. But she was too exhausted and too grateful to argue. "I'll work. I can cook and clean and mend. I can help with whatever you need. Right now, you need to sleep. We'll talk about the rest later." He stood and gestured to the bed. "Take that. I'll make up a bedroll by the fire." "I can't take your bed." "You can, and you will. Your feet are bleeding through those rags you're calling shoes. You need proper rest, not a night on the floor." Beatrice looked down and realized he was right. Blood had seeped through the remnants of her shoes, leaving small stains on the floor. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was fading, and pain was flooding in to replace it. Dalton went to a chest and pulled out what looked like soft leather moccasins and a clean shirt. "Wash up with the water in that basin. The soap's on the shelf. Put these on. They'll be too big, but they're better than what you've got. We'll deal with everything else tomorrow." He stepped outside, closing the door behind him to give her privacy. Beatrice stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by his casual kindness. She'd expected to die in the woods today. Instead, she was standing in a warm cabin with food in her stomach, and a stranger who'd thrown her enslavement papers into the fire. She washed as best she could with the water and soap, cleaning the worst of the dirt and blood from her skin. Her feet were a mess of blisters and cuts, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. She peeled off her ruined dress and put on the shirt he'd given her. It fell to her knees and smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and earthy that made her feel strangely safe. The moccasins were indeed too large, but they were soft and didn't hurt her wounded feet. She looked around for something to do with her filthy dress and decided to leave it by the door to deal with later. When she opened the door to call Dalton back inside, she found him sitting on a stump near the woodpile, whittling something from a piece of wood. He looked up at her approach, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in the sight of her in his shirt. "Thank you," she said again. "For everything." He nodded and stood, tucking the knife and wood into his pocket. "Get some sleep. You're safe here." Beatrice wanted to believe him. As she climbed into the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable with its thick mattress and heavy furs, she found that maybe she did. Dalton settled by the fire with a bedroll and a blanket, his rifle within easy reach. The last thing she saw before exhaustion pulled her under was his large frame silhouetted by firelight, keeping watch. She woke to the smell of frying bacon and coffee. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small windows, and for a confused moment, Beatrice didn't know where she was. Then everything came rushing back: the chase, the contract, Dalton's intervention. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. "Easy," Dalton said from the fireplace. He was cooking breakfast, his broad back to her. "You're still safe. It's near noon. I figured you needed the rest." Noon. She'd slept for almost a full day. Beatrice threw off the furs and stood, wincing as her abused feet reminded her of yesterday's flight. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sleep so long." "Why are you apologizing? Your body needed it." He turned and gestured to the table where he'd laid out plates. "Sit, eat, then we'll talk." The bacon was crispy and perfect. He'd made some kind of pan bread too, and there were eggs. Beatrice ate more slowly this time, but she was still ravenous. Dalton ate across from her, his portions considerably larger than hers, which made sense given his size. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked. 6 years. "I was a trapper first, then I decided I wanted something permanent. I filed a homestead claim, built this cabin, put down roots. Don't you get lonely? I like the quiet." He sipped his coffee. "I was in the war, Confederate side, though I didn't own slaves and didn't believe in it. I was 18 and stupid and thought I was fighting for my home. After it ended, I couldn't stand being around people anymore. Too much noise, too many memories. The mountains don't judge, don't ask questions, don't want anything from me." Beatrice heard the pain beneath his words. "I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for. It was a long time ago." He set down his cup. "What about you? You said your father died. You got any other family?" "No, my mother died when I was 12. It's just been my father and me since then. We moved to Denver 5 years ago from Kansas. He worked as a carpenter. He was good at it, made decent money. But he got sick last spring, some kind of lung infection. He tried to work through it, but it just got worse. By the time he agreed to see a doctor, it was too late." She swallowed hard. "He died in August. I'd been working as a seamstress, but it wasn't enough to cover the funeral costs. That's when Vincent Harrow showed up with his offer. This Harrow, he was your father's friend. I thought so. He'd come to dinner a few times. He was always polite, always kind. I trusted him. Beatrice's hands tightened around her cup. I was stupid. You weren't stupid. You were grieving and vulnerable, and he took advantage of that. That's on him, not you. The law doesn't see it that way. The law is written by men who benefit from it being written that way. Dalton leaned back in his chair. You can't go back to Denver. They'll be watching for you. What did you do before your father got sick? What skills do you have? I can sew, like I said. I can cook and clean. I can read and write and do figures. My father taught me. He said a woman needed education just as much as a man, even if the world didn't always agree. Smart man. Dalton was quiet for a moment, thinking. There are towns in these mountains, small settlements where folks mind their own business. Once things cool down, we could get you to one of them. You could set up as a seamstress, start over. With what money? I have nothing. Not even a proper dress anymore. I've got money. Trapping pays well when you're good at it, and I don't spend much living out here. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better about accepting it. You can pay me back when you're established. Beatrice stared at him. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Because it's the right thing to do. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. They fell into a routine over the next several days. Dalton went about his usual work, checking his trap lines, hunting, gathering firewood, tending to various projects around the cabin. Beatrice helped where she could, though he insisted she take it easy until her feet healed. She mended his clothes, which had seen better days, and reorganized his shelves, which had no organization at all. She cooked meals from his supplies, and he complimented her cooking with obvious sincerity. In the evenings they talked. Dalton was quieter than anyone she'd ever met, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and measured. He told her about the mountains, about the animals that lived there, about the changing seasons and how to read the weather. He had a small collection of books, and she was surprised to discover he was well-read despite his isolation. They spent one evening discussing Milton's Paradise Lost, and she found his interpretations fascinating. But beneath the domestic comfort, there was something else building between them. Beatrice found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt when he chopped wood, the careful precision of his large hands as he skinned game or repaired equipment. She noticed how his hair caught the sunlight, turning lighter at the ends, and how his eyes softened when he looked at her. She caught him watching her too, when she reached for something on a high shelf, stretching up on her toes. When she sat by the fire in the evening, brushing out her long red hair. When she laughed at something he said, which was happening more and more often. The awareness between them grew into something tangible, something that made the air feel charged whenever they were in close proximity. A week after her arrival, Dalton came back from checking his traps with troubling news. I found tracks. 3 men, maybe 4, camping about 2 miles east of here. They're still looking for you. Beatrice's stomach dropped. What do we do? Nothing changes. You stay inside when I'm gone, keep the door barred. I'll keep watch. They won't find this place easily. It's not on any trail, and I've been careful to keep it hidden. He set his rifle by the door, but we need to be cautious. That night, neither of them could sleep. Beatrice lay in the bed staring at the ceiling while Dalton sat by the fire cleaning his rifle. Finally, she couldn't take the silence anymore. Dalton. Yeah, what if they find me? What if they take me back? They won't. His voice was hard, certain. But what if they do? What if there are too many of them, or they come when you're away, or he stood up and crossed to the bed. In the firelight he looked enormous but not frightening. Never frightening, not to her. Beatrice, look at me. She sat up, meeting his eyes. I won't let them take you. I don't care how many of them there are. I don't care what papers they think they have. You're under my protection now, and I keep what's mine safe. Yours, she whispered. Something shifted in his expression. You've been here over a week. You fit into my life like you were always meant to be in it. I know it's too soon to say things like this, but I've never been good at pretty words or courting rituals. So I'll just say it plain. I've grown attached to you, Beatrice. More than attached. And the thought of anyone hurting you or taking you away makes me want to break things. Beatrice's heart was pounding. I've grown attached to you too. I didn't think I could feel this way, not so quickly, but you've been kinder to me than anyone ever has. You make me feel safe. You make me feel like maybe I could have a life worth living again. Dalton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his large hand. His palm was warm and rough with calluses. I'm not good with people. I'm too rough, too used to being alone. I don't know how to be what you might need. You're exactly what I need. She covered his hand with hers. You're strong and kind and good. You saved me. You've taken care of me. You've treated me like I matter. You do matter. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. You matter more than anything has mattered to me in years. Beatrice didn't know who moved first, but suddenly they were kissing. His lips were softer than she'd expected, gentle despite his size and strength. He cradled her face like she was something precious, something that might break if he wasn't careful. She reached up and tangled her fingers in his long hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. I should probably court you properly. Take time, do this right. We're living alone in a cabin in the wilderness. I don't think there's a proper way to do this. He laughed, a sound she'd rarely heard from him, and it made her smile. Fair point. I want this, she said firmly. I want you. If you want me. I've wanted you since you walked through that door looking like a half-drowned wildcat. He pulled back just enough to look at her seriously. But I'll wait if you need time. I know you've been through hell recently. I've been through hell and you pulled me out of it. I don't want to wait. Life's too short and too uncertain. She pulled him down for another kiss, deeper this time, more urgent. Dalton made a sound low in his throat and gathered her closer, careful of his strength but no longer holding back. They tumbled backward onto the bed together, and Beatrice had never felt more certain of anything in her life. This man, this strong, quiet, careful man, had become everything to her in the span of days, and she was going to hold on to him with both hands. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies and preferences. Dalton was as gentle as he'd promised, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, that she wanted this. His size had been intimidating at first, but he made it work, made it good, made her feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Beatrice's head on his chest, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, beneath her ear. I've never done that before, she admitted quietly, his arm tightened around her. I'm honored that you chose me. I think I'd choose you again in every lifetime. That's good because I'm not letting you go. Ever. You understand that? She tilted her head back to look at him. Is that a proposal, Dalton Zimmerman? It's a statement of fact, but if you want a proposal, I'll give you one. He shifted so he could look down at her properly. Marry me, Beatrice. Stay here with me, make a life with me in these mountains. I can't promise you an easy life, but I can promise you'll always be safe, always be loved, always be treated like you're the most important thing in my world, because you are. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her again, deep and sweet, sealing the promise. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. But inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, they had everything they needed. The next morning they were eating breakfast when they heard horses approaching. Dalton was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, positioning himself between Beatrice and the door. "Get in the back room," he said quietly. "Bar the door behind you. Dalton, now Beatrice." She grabbed a knife from the table and hurried into the back room, sliding the heavy bar across the door. But she put her ear against the wood, listening. Heavy footsteps on the porch. A knock. Dalton opened the door. "What? Morning, friend." It was Wade's voice. "We met about a week ago." "You remember me?" "I remember. I told you to leave my property." "Now, I've been thinking about that. See, that girl we were tracking. She disappeared right around here, and you were awfully quick to send us away. Makes a man wonder somewhere else." "We've been watching the trails, like I said. Nobody's come down from this area. Which means if she came up here, she's still up here. Maybe holed up in a cave somewhere, or maybe in a nice warm cabin. Search every cave you want, but you're not searching my home. We could get a marshal up here, make it official." Wade's voice was smug now. "Go ahead. Nearest marshal is in Leadville, 3 days' ride from here. You know how long your supplies will last. You're already running thin. I can see it in how gaunt your men look. And winter's coming early this year. The first snow will fly in a week, maybe 2. You'll be trapped up here if you don't head down soon." There was a long pause. Wade was clearly weighing his options. "That girl's worth a lot of money to me. And your life is worth what exactly?" "Because that's what you're risking if you push this." "You threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality. You're on my land. You're harassing me. I have every legal right to defend my property and my person. Now you've got a choice. You can leave now while you still can. Or you can try to force your way in here, and we'll see how that works out for you." Another long pause. Then Wade said, "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. Because if I see you on my land again, I won't bother with warnings. I'll just shoot." Footsteps retreating, horses moving away. Dalton waited several long minutes before calling out, "Beatrice, you can come out." She opened the door, still clutching the knife. "Are they gone?" "For now. He's right about one thing, though. Winter's coming. That'll keep them from searching much longer." He pulled her into his arms. "But we need to make sure they don't come back next spring. Which means we need to make your presence here legal and permanent." "How?" "We get married, officially, with a license and everything. Once you're my wife, you're under my protection legally. Any contract you sign before becomes null and void. Married women's debts are assumed by their husbands in the eyes of the law, but since I never agreed to any contract, it can't be enforced. And since the debt was fraudulent to begin with, any halfway decent judge would throw it out." Beatrice blinked. "You've really thought this through?" "I've been thinking about nothing else for days." He cupped her face in his hands. "I know we were going to take our time, but circumstances are pushing us. We need to act fast. There's a circuit preacher who comes through a little settlement called Ashford about 15 miles from here. If we time it right, we can get married and get you a legal identity as my wife before anyone knows we're there. 15 miles. Can we make that without being seen? There's an old game trail that bypasses the main routes. It's rough going, but my horse can handle it. We'll leave tomorrow at first light." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Dalton packed supplies while Beatrice did her best to make herself presentable. He found an old dress that had belonged to his sister, he explained, who'd visited once years ago and left some things behind. It was a bit loose on Beatrice, but it was clean and intact, which was more than could be said for anything she had. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Beatrice asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Your sister visited once. Does that mean you have family somewhere?" Dalton was quiet for a long moment. "I have a younger sister and a brother. They live in Missouri with their families." We write sometimes, not often. They came out after the war trying to convince me to come back east, but I couldn't do it. Sarah, my sister, she understood better than my brother did. She stayed a week, helped me finish the cabin, then went home. She sends me letters a few times a year. Do you miss them? Sometimes. But I can't be the man they remember. The war changed me too much. He looked at her. You're the first person in years who's made me think maybe I could be part of something again, part of a family. Beatrice took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. We'll be our own family, and maybe someday you'll feel ready to see them again. I'd like to meet them. They'd love you. Sarah especially. She always worried I'd die alone up here. He smiled slightly. I'll have to write and tell her she was wrong. They set out before dawn, riding double on Dalton's sturdy mountain horse. The animal was massive, bred for hauling loads through difficult terrain, and it carried their combined weight without complaint. Beatrice sat in front of Dalton, cradled between his arms as he handled the reins. The trail he'd mentioned was barely visible, more of a suggestion than an actual path, winding through dense forest and over rocky streams. They rode for hours, stopping only to rest the horse and eat a cold lunch. Dalton kept constant watch, his body tense with alertness. But they saw no one, heard nothing but wildlife and wind. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they emerged from the forest onto a ridge that overlooked a small valley. Below, Beatrice could see a cluster of buildings. Ashford, population maybe 50 if that. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could make out a general store, what might have been a saloon, and several homes. The preacher stays at the boarding house when he's in town, Dalton said. We'll go straight there. If he's not there yet, we'll wait. They rode down into the valley as the light faded. A few people stopped to stare at them, but nobody interfered. Dalton had that effect on people, Beatrice had noticed. His size and bearing made folks think twice about approaching him. The boarding house was a 2-story building with a covered porch. An older woman was sweeping the steps as they approached. She looked up, squinting at them in the dim light. Help you folks. We're looking for the circuit preacher, Dalton said. Is he here? Reverend Matthews. Came in this afternoon. He'll be holding services tomorrow morning before heading on to his next stop. The woman leaned on her broom, studying them with open curiosity. You two looking to get hitched? Yes, madam. Well, praise be, don't get much romance up here in the mountains. The Reverend's inside having his supper, but I'll let him know you're here. Tie up your horse and come on in. They followed her into a warm common room where several people were eating at a long table. A man in his 50s, dressed in simple black with a white collar, looked up as they entered. His face was kind, weathered by years of travel. Reverend Matthews, these young folks need your services, the boarding house keeper announced. The preacher stood, smiling. Always happy to perform a wedding, though it's a bit late in the day, perhaps tomorrow after services. We need to do it tonight if possible, Dalton said. We have reasons for the hurry. The Reverend's expression shifted to concern. He gestured them to a quieter corner of the room. Are you in some kind of trouble? The lady is, Dalton said. She was fleeing an unjust contract when she came to me for help. I want to marry her, make her my wife legally so she's protected. But there are men looking for her, and we need this done before anyone knows we're here. I see. The Reverend studied Beatrice carefully. Young lady, are you entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion, no pressure. I love him, Beatrice said firmly. I want to marry him more than I've wanted anything. Please, we don't have much time. The Reverend nodded slowly. I'll need to see identification and we'll need witnesses. I have my homestead papers, Dalton said, producing them from inside his coat. They have my full name and details. And you, miss? Beatrice hesitated. She had nothing. Her life in Denver might as well have belonged to someone else. She lost everything in a fire, Dalton said smoothly. Her family is all dead, but her name is Beatrice Owens. She's 21 years old and she's of sound mind and body to enter into marriage. I'll swear to that under oath if needed. The Reverend looked troubled, but after a moment he nodded. I'll take your word for it. The Lord knows the hearts of people better than any paper does. Let me get my Bible and the marriage license. Mrs. Hudson, can you and your husband serve as witnesses? The boarding house keeper, apparently Mrs. Hudson, beamed. We'd be honored. 20 minutes later, Beatrice stood in the common room of the boarding house with Dalton beside her, holding his large, calloused hand. The Reverend stood before them, Bible open, Mrs. Hudson and her husband flanking them as witnesses. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The words flowed over Beatrice like music. She watched Dalton's face, saw the intensity in his eyes as he looked at her, and knew she'd never forget this moment. She'd come to Colorado expecting to bury her father and move on with her life. Instead, she'd been betrayed, hunted, and saved by a man who'd shown her what love could really mean. Do you, Dalton Joseph Zimmerman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. His voice was steady, certain. And do you, Beatrice Ann Owens, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. Tears streamed down her face, but they were happy tears. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado and by God Almighty, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Zimmerman, you may kiss your bride. Dalton pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, not caring that they had an audience. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Hudson was crying too, and her husband was grinning. Congratulations, the Reverend said, producing a marriage license. Sign here, both of you, and your witnesses as well. They signed. The Reverend signed. The Hudson signed. And just like that, Beatrice Owens became Beatrice Zimmerman with all the legal protections that name afforded her. You'll want to file this with the county clerk, the Reverend said, handing Dalton a copy of the license. The nearest office is in Leadville. We'll handle it, Dalton promised. He paid the Reverend and thanked the Hudsons, then turned to Beatrice. Mrs. Zimmerman, shall we head home? She smiled through her tears. Yes, Mr. Zimmerman, let's go home. They rode back through the darkness, the trail treacherous but manageable with Dalton's knowledge of the terrain. Beatrice dozed against his chest, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the day. She woke when they arrived back at the cabin, the familiar structure looking more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Dalton helped her down from the horse and saw to the animal while she went inside and built up the fire. When he joined her, bringing cold night air and the smell of pine with him, she turned to face him. We're married, she said, like she still couldn't quite believe it. We are. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. You're safe now, legally, officially safe. You're mine and I take care of what's mine. I'm yours, she agreed, reaching up to kiss him. And you're mine. They made love again that night, slower and sweeter than before, celebrating their marriage in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, lying in the tangled furs with Dalton's arm around her, Beatrice finally felt at peace. She'd lost everything, been betrayed and hunted, but she'd found something better than what she'd lost. She'd found love, real and true and strong. She'd found a home. She'd found herself. The first snow came 3 days later, just as Dalton had predicted. They woke to a world transformed, everything blanketed in white. Dalton immediately began his winter preparations, and Beatrice helped. They brought in extra firewood, checked the stores of food, made sure everything was secure against the coming cold. A week after the snow, they had a visitor. Beatrice was inside when she heard Dalton's voice from outside, talking to someone. She tensed, hand going to the knife she now kept with her always, but Dalton called out, "Beatrice, it's fine. Come out here." She opened the door to find Dalton standing with a man in a heavy coat and fur hat. The stranger was older, maybe in his 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Beatrice, this is Marshal Tom Crawford. He's the federal marshal I mentioned. Marshal, my wife, Beatrice Zimmerman." The marshal touched his hat. "Madam, pleasure to meet you." "Marshal," Beatrice said cautiously. "What brings you out here?" "A complaint filed by a Mr. Wade Cassidy claiming your husband is harboring a fugitive. That would be you, I assume." Beatrice's heart sank. "I'm not a fugitive. I ran from a fraudulent contract. So I've been hearing. I did some digging after the complaint came in. Turns out Mr. Cassidy and his employer have filed similar complaints several times over the years. They find vulnerable women, trap them in debt contracts, and then force them into prostitution. The judges in Denver and Central City have been looking the other way because they're getting paid off, but some folks have been keeping records." He pulled out a folded paper. "I've got a warrant here, but it's not for you, Mrs. Zimmerman. It's for Wade Cassidy, Vincent Harrow, and 3 others for fraud, extortion, and trafficking. They're going to stand trial in federal court." Beatrice couldn't breathe. "What? You're not the first woman they've done this to, just the first to get away clean." And when word got out that someone had escaped, other victims started coming forward. "We've got enough evidence now to put them away for a long time." The marshal smiled. "You're free, madam, completely free. The contract you signed, even if it was legitimate, is void. Your marriage makes it so. But more than that, the men who were chasing you are now running from me." Beatrice felt her knees buckle. Dalton caught her, holding her up. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over," the marshal confirmed. "I wanted to ride out here personally to tell you, also wanted to thank your husband. Mr. Zimmerman, you likely saved this woman's life, and your intervention gave us the time we needed to build a case. The territory of Colorado owes you a debt." "I don't want thanks," Dalton said. "I just wanted to keep her safe." "Well, you did that, and then some." The marshal tipped his hat again. "I'll leave you folks alone now. Enjoy your marriage. Looks like you found yourself a good man, Mrs. Zimmerman." "I have," Beatrice said, looking up at Dalton. "The best man." After the marshal left, Beatrice sat at the cabin table and cried for a long time. These were tears of relief, of release, of joy. Everything she'd been running from was gone. She was free. She was safe. She was loved. Dalton held her through it all, patient and solid, his large hands stroking her hair. When she finally calmed down, he made her tea and sat with her while she drank it. "I can't believe it's really over," she said. "It's over. You never have to be afraid again." "What do we do now?" He smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face. "Now we live. We make a home here. We build a life together. Speaking of which, we'll need to expand the cabin before next winter." "Why?" "Because you're going to want a proper kitchen. And maybe a separate bedroom, turn this space into a real living area. And if we're lucky, maybe a room for children someday." Beatrice's heart swelled. "You want children, with you?" "Yes, as many as you're willing to have. I want this place filled with life and laughter. I want everything I thought I'd never have again." She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes to all of it. A bigger cabin, a real kitchen, children, everything. I want to build a life with you, Dalton. The biggest, fullest life we can manage." He caught her easily, lifting her into his lap. "Then that's what we'll do." The winter passed in a warm blur. Beatrice learned to love the snow, the way it muffled sound and made their cabin feel like the only place in the world. Dalton taught her to snowshoe, to ice fish, to read the signs of the forest in winter. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading together, talking, making love. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, the small intimacies that made a marriage real. By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and coaxing green life back into the mountains, Beatrice knew she was pregnant. She told Dalton one morning over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then stood up so fast his chair fell over. Really, really, I'm almost certain all the signs are there. He let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every animal within a mile and scooped her up, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We're having a baby. We're having a baby. Careful, you'll make me dizzy," he set her down gently, immediately contrite. "Sorry, are you okay? Do you need to sit down? Should you be eating more? I'll hunt extra game. We'll need supplies for." She put her hand over his mouth. "Dalton, breathe. I'm fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But yes, we should plan. We'll need baby clothes, a cradle, cloth for diapers. And we should probably ride to Ashford at some point so I can see if there's a midwife who can come when the time gets close." He nodded seriously. "We'll do all of that. Whatever you need, Beatrice. Whatever you and the baby need." True to his word, Dalton threw himself into preparations. He built a beautiful cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and carving protective symbols into the wood. He hunted and trapped with renewed vigor, stockpiling meat and furs to trade for supplies. He even started work on expanding the cabin, determined to have a proper home for his growing family. In June, they made the trip to Ashford together. The settlement had grown slightly over the winter, adding a few more buildings. They found a midwife, a competent woman named Mrs. Potter, who agreed to come stay with them when Beatrice's time grew near. They also found a general store where Beatrice could buy fabric and thread and other necessities. While Beatrice shopped, Dalton visited the saloon to catch up on news. He came back looking troubled. "What's wrong?" Beatrice asked immediately. "Nothing bad. Actually, something good. Wade Cassidy and Vincent Harrow were convicted. They're going to federal prison for 20 years. 2 of the hired guns who were with them took plea deals and got lesser sentences. The 4th man disappeared, probably fled the territory." "That's wonderful news. So why do you look worried?" "Because someone in the saloon recognized your description. Started asking questions about a red-haired woman who married a mountain man last fall. I shut him down, but word is spreading. People know you were one of Cassidy's targets, that you got away." "Is that dangerous?" "I don't think so. The men who were after you are behind bars. But it means people are curious. We might get visitors, folks wanting to hear your story." Beatrice considered this. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe if people hear what happened to me, it'll help other women avoid the same trap." "Vincent Harrow wasn't the only man running that kind of scheme, I'm sure." Dalton nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Just promise me you'll be careful. I don't want anyone bothering you, especially not with the baby coming." "I promise." They returned to the cabin and settled back into their routine. True to Dalton's warning, they did get a few visitors over the summer. Most were just curious neighbors from nearby claims, bringing gifts and asking after Beatrice's health in the way of mountain folk. A few were women who'd heard her story and wanted to thank her for speaking out. One was a journalist from a Denver newspaper, hoping to write about her ordeal. Dalton ran him off. By September, Beatrice was heavily pregnant and more than ready for the baby to arrive. She waddled around the cabin, which Dalton had successfully expanded into a 2-room structure with a proper kitchen area. She'd sewn a mountain of tiny clothes, driven by nesting instincts she couldn't control. Mrs. Potter arrived in late September and settled into the new space Dalton had built onto the cabin specifically for her. The midwife was a no-nonsense woman who delivered hundreds of babies over her long career. Her presence eased both Beatrice's and Dalton's anxiety. The baby came on a crisp October morning, arriving after 12 hours of labor that left Beatrice exhausted but elated. Dalton paced outside for most of it, chopping enough firewood to last 3 winters. When Mrs. Potter finally called him in, he rushed to Beatrice's side. "It's a boy," Beatrice said, her voice tired but full of joy. She held up the tiny bundle. "We have a son." Dalton took the baby with shaking hands, his eyes wide. The infant was tiny in his large grip, red-faced and squalling. "He's perfect," Dalton whispered. "He's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. Dalton thought for a moment. "My father's name was James, and your father was William, you said." "James William Zimmerman," Beatrice tested. "I like it. So do I." Dalton carefully handed the baby back to Beatrice and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at them both with an expression of absolute wonder. "Thank you for him, for everything. You've given me a family, Beatrice. You've given me a reason to live again." Tears streamed down her face. "You saved me. You gave me a life when I had nothing. We saved each other." Mrs. Potter stayed for 2 weeks, making sure both Beatrice and the baby were healthy and teaching them the basics of infant care. When she finally left, pressing payment into her hand and thanking her profusely, it was just the 3 of them: Dalton, Beatrice, and baby James. The winter was harder with a newborn, but they managed. James was a healthy baby with powerful lungs and his father's appetite. Beatrice recovered well from the birth, and soon she was back to her normal routines, with the addition of caring for an infant. Dalton was a devoted father, incredibly gentle with his son despite his size. He sang to James in a surprisingly good voice, old songs from before the war. He carved toys and built a bigger cradle as the baby grew. He walked the floor with James during fussy nights so Beatrice could sleep. By spring, James was 6 months old and thriving. Beatrice had never been happier. She had a husband she loved, a beautiful son, and a home that felt like paradise even in its remoteness. One warm May afternoon, as they sat outside watching James attempt to grab at grass, Dalton said, "I wrote to my sister, told her about you, about James." She wrote back. "She wants to visit this summer, bring her family." "Really? That's wonderful." "I thought maybe it was time," he said quietly. "Time to reconnect with that part of my life. You've helped me heal, Beatrice. Helped me remember that I can be around people without falling apart. And I want James to know his family, both sides." "We don't know anything about my family," Beatrice pointed out. "My father was an only child and I never knew my mother's people. Then we'll make our own family. James will have cousins from my side, and we'll fill this mountain with our own children if you're willing." She laughed. "Let's give it a little more time before we start on another baby, but yes, eventually. I want a big family too." Sarah Zimmerman arrived in July with her husband and 3 children. She was a petite woman, nothing like her giant brother, but the resemblance was there in their eyes and their smiles. She took one look at Beatrice and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Thank God for you," Sarah said. "Thank God you found him. I'd about given up hope that Dalton would ever be happy again." The visit was wonderful. Sarah's children, 2 girls and a boy, explored the mountains with wide-eyed wonder. Her husband, a quiet man named Thomas, helped Dalton with projects around the cabin. Sarah and Beatrice became fast friends, talking for hours about everything and nothing. On their last night before heading back to Missouri, Sarah pulled Beatrice aside. "You've worked a miracle with my brother. He's the man he used to be before the war, maybe even better. I can never thank you enough for that." "He saved me first," Beatrice said. "I was running for my life when I stumbled onto his land. He protected me, married me, gave me everything. If anyone worked a miracle, it was him." Sarah smiled. "Maybe you saved each other. That's how the best marriages work, I think. You'll write to me, won't you? I want to know everything about James as he grows." "I will, and you're welcome to visit any time. We might take you up on that. The children already love it here. They want to come back next summer." The years flowed past like the creek that ran near their cabin. James grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy with his father's size and his mother's red hair. When he was 3, Beatrice gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Alina, who were absolute terrors from the moment they could crawl. 2 years after that came another boy, Samuel, who was quieter than his siblings but just as loved. Dalton built onto the cabin twice more, creating a real home with separate bedrooms for the children, a proper kitchen for Beatrice, and even a small library where they kept their growing collection of books. He taught his children to hunt and trap, to read the forest and respect the land. Beatrice taught them to read and write and do figures, giving them the education her father had given her. They visited Ashford regularly, and the settlement grew into a proper town over the years. Colorado became a state in 1876, the same year James turned 4. The wilderness they lived in became less wild as more settlers arrived, but their corner of the mountains remained relatively isolated. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Beatrice would lie in bed with Dalton and marvel at the life they'd built. She'd come here running, terrified, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fraudulent contract that had made her a slave. Now she had everything: a husband who loved her fiercely, 4 healthy children, a beautiful home, and a community that accepted her. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton would ask, pulling her closer. "How lucky I am, how far we've come. We've come far together," he'd kiss her forehead, "and we'll keep going. We've got years ahead of us, Beatrice, years and years." When James was 10, old enough to understand, Beatrice finally told him the full story of how she'd met his father. They were sitting by the creek, watching him fish when he asked, "Ma, how come we live so far from town? Pa's strong enough to live anywhere." She'd known this conversation would come eventually. "When I was younger, before I met your father, some bad men tried to hurt me. I ran, and I ended up at your father's cabin. He saved me, protected me, and eventually we fell in love and got married. We stayed here because this is where we're happiest, but also because this is where we're safe." James had processed this with the seriousness of a child who'd been raised to think before speaking. "Pa killed the bad men. No. The law took care of them. They went to prison for what they did. But Pa would have killed them if he needed to keep you safe." "Yes, he would have. That's what family does. We protect each other." James had nodded, satisfied with this answer, and went back to fishing. But from that day forward, Beatrice noticed him paying closer attention when Dalton taught him to shoot and fight. He was learning to be a protector like his father. The twins, Emma and Alina, grew into beautiful girls who looked like smaller versions of Beatrice but had their father's strength and determination. Samuel was the gentle one, more interested in books than hunting, and Dalton encouraged this, having learned that strength came in many forms. By the time Beatrice was 40, she had 6 children. Another boy, Thomas, named after Sarah's husband, had arrived when she was 35, followed surprisingly by another set of twins, boys this time when she was 38. Dalton joked that they were single-handedly populating the Colorado mountains. The cabin had become a complex of connected structures, almost a compound. James, now 20, had built his own small cabin nearby with his father's help, preparing for when he'd eventually marry and start his own family. The twins were 16 and had suitors calling, much to Dalton's dismay. Samuel was 14 and already taller than Beatrice. The younger three were still children, running wild through the mountains under their father's watchful eye. Through it all, through the children and the years and the changes that came to Colorado as it grew from territory to state, Dalton and Beatrice's love never wavered. If anything, it deepened, becoming the bedrock on which their entire family was built. They still spent evenings by the fire, though now they were usually surrounded by children. They still made time for each other, stealing moments of privacy where they could. They still looked at each other with the same intensity they'd had that first night when Beatrice had stumbled into his cabin, running for her life. When Beatrice was 50 and Dalton 54, they took a trip, just the two of them. The older children could manage the younger ones for a week, they'd decided. They rode to Ashford, which was now a thriving town with a railroad depot, and from there took a train to Denver. Beatrice hadn't been back to Denver since she'd fled 26 years earlier. The city had grown enormously, almost unrecognizable from her memories. But she'd wanted to come back, wanted to face the place that had almost destroyed her from a position of strength. They visited her father's grave, which she'd never been able to do before. Dalton stood beside her as she knelt and placed flowers on the marker, telling her father about the life she'd built, the family she'd raised, the love she'd found. "He'd be proud of you," Dalton said as they walked away. "I hope so. I think he would have liked you." "I know he would have. Any man who raised a daughter as strong and smart as you was clearly doing something right." They also visited the courthouse where her false contract had been filed. It had long since been nullified, destroyed along with the records of Cassidy's and Harrow's other crimes. But Beatrice wanted to stand in that building as a free woman, as Beatrice Zimmerman instead of the terrified Beatrice Owens who thought her life was over. "How does it feel?" Dalton asked. "Like closure. Like the final piece of that nightmare is gone." She took his hand. "I'm ready to go home now. To the cabin. To wherever you are. That's home." They rode back to the mountains, to the compound where their children waited, and Beatrice felt nothing but gratitude. Her life hadn't turned out anything like she'd planned. It had been harder in some ways, full of challenges she'd never anticipated. But it had also been fuller, richer, more love-filled than anything she could have imagined. The years continued to pass. Children grew up and married and had children of their own. Dalton's hair turned gray, then white, though he remained strong and vital well into his 60s. Beatrice's red hair faded but never lost its fire. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, the heart of a sprawling mountain family. They never left their cabin for long. It was their sanctuary, the place where their story had begun. Sometimes, when they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play, Beatrice would remember that terrified girl who'd pounded on the door begging for help. She barely recognized that girl anymore. That girl had been broken, desperate, alone. The woman she'd become was strong, loved, surrounded by family. And it was all because a mountain man had opened his door, torn up a piece of paper, and chosen to keep her safe. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. James, now a father of 5 himself, gave a speech about the legacy his parents had built, the example they'd set. Sarah had come from Missouri with her grandchildren. The cabin complex overflowed with people, with love, with life. That night, after everyone had finally settled down to sleep in various cabins and lean toss, Dalton and Beatrice walked to the creek where she'd first splashed through, running for her life. "You remember that day?" Beatrice asked, though she knew he did. "Every second of it. You burst into my life like a force of nature, and nothing was ever the same again. You saved me. We saved each other, he corrected, pulling her close. And we built something beautiful together. Look at all of this, Beatrice. Look at what we made. She looked back at the cabins, glowing with lamplight full of their family. It's more than I ever dreamed of. It's exactly what you deserved. You just needed someone to see it to give you a chance to flourish. He kissed her temple. I love you. I've loved you since the day you walked into my cabin, and I'll love you until the day I die and beyond that if there's anything beyond. I love you too. My mountain man, my protector, my everything. They stood by the creek for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the sound of water and wind and the distant laughter of their grandchildren. The contract that had once bound Beatrice was long gone, burned to ash in Dalton's fireplace. But the bonds they'd forged, the marriage they'd built, the family they'd created, those would last forever. As they walked back to the cabin, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd been running from men who'd tried to buy her, to own her, to break her. Instead, she'd found a man who'd freed her, who'd given her everything and asked for nothing but her love in return. And she'd given it gladly, completely, forever. Their story wasn't one of perfection. They'd had hard times, arguments, struggles. Raising 8 children in the wilderness hadn't been easy. There had been lean winters, illnesses, close calls. But through it all, they'd had each other. And that had made all the difference. As Beatrice Zimmerman fell asleep that night in her husband's arms, surrounded by the family they'd built together, she knew that her life had turned out exactly as it was meant to. The girl who'd run into these mountains seeking only survival had found so much more. She'd found home. She'd found love. She'd found herself. And she'd lived happily ever after.